some people love the bad guy. Why? Because they want to be that guy. They want to be the billionaire. They want to be the politician.
Emotional algebra, where the heart meets the math. What is integral is derivative as you figure out your path. Power plus emotions equals more than you can see. Listening to the wisdom.
Hey viewers, we're picking up the episode where we left off in the last episode, and hope you enjoy the continuation of this. So here we go. So this is one of the things again that I really wanted to cover, and why we secretly love the bad guy. What is it about it that has us root for that bad guy?
I love this so much, because this is where I was talking about the show You on Netflix. Like, if you all haven't seen it, it is literally a serial killer that Penn Badgley plays, this guy named Joe. And you're rooting for him because he's so charismatic and he's just so lovely and he's so cute and he's so charming and endearing and captivating and like every adjective that is just lovely. And yet he's a serial killer. And somehow, like, you don't want him to get caught. You're like, oh no, but he's such a good guy.
And he's going to do it again. He can't help himself. And his story, his it's more of that is kind of a rags to riches story in a lot of ways, So, and then he gets in the hole, the man in the hole, and committing the crime, and how is he going to get out of it? And how do we root for him? So what we're talking about here is the idea of, we have restricted rules with most people, but the villain, the bad guy, he has this unmitigated freedom. He finds a way around the rules. So the idea that we see is that villains get things done. They act on ambition and power without the restriction of social rules. We are mesmerized by their absolute freedom. The next part is the dark triad appeal. Narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy audiences who share mild traits of these personalities feel a magnetic, validating pull towards the villain. So it's this way that we identify ourselves in things we don't feel we can show in culture. And then we move to that vicarious thrill. The movie theater is a safe laboratory. We can experience dangerous moral transgressions and aggressive impulses from a safe distance without real world consequences. I'll tell you, my biggest journey in this is guilt. I have an overactive guilt gland, and I feel so stressed in these movies because I'm like, how can they do this? I'm feeling all this stress in what they've done, and that there should be a consequence, and they evade it. And the interesting thing is, in art imitating life, I think in some ways we see this play out in our political systems, our power systems. We see some of this idea of why, to me, in some ways, we make people who have been uber successful the bad guy. And yet some people love the bad guy. Why? Because they want to be that guy. They want to be the billionaire. They want to be the politician. They want to be these people. So when we see them succeed in some ways, I think for some of us, when we feel so stepped on by life and there's no way out and the American dream seems lost, we're like, well, these guys did it. The thing that they don't realize in a lot of these stories in real life, it's the consequences of what we might live with and what we sacrifice within ourselves when we look for the external rewards and factors. And we go back to some of these movies where people found a lot of times they find their moral compass. They find their values. We don't root for people who end up the wealthy one who just got away with anything without any feeling of remorse or any connection. We want to see them destroyed, yet we see different ways in life. And I'd love to know the story arcs of some of the things in life that we're seeing around us right now and why we see them the way we do.
Yeah, if you don't have the connection, if there's not an empathetic connection to the character, you're not going to care, to your point. So I think the reason You on Netflix works is because we do know his background. We can understand where he's coming from and how life brought him to that point. And therefore, there is a level of compassion. But if you don't have that level of compassion and empathy, then he's a serial killer, which is what really intrigues the audience, that that when it first came out, there were so many people going, why am I rooting for this guy? Like, he literally is a murderer.
Mhm.
But it really does show the complexity of human emotions as well, which is
Yeah.
mesmerizing and fascinating.
Yeah. And I think even like I said, in like a good politician will play the movie arc. A good politician might play the man in the hole, might play the rags to riches story. So a good politician is able to tell the story and manage the story arcs and how our movies and the immersion of our culture into movies affecting our perceptions of reality and what real outcomes are and who's really being affected. Because at the end of the movie, we go home
Yep.
and then we're back to life again. So here what we're looking at is the character psychology matrix. So we're looking at the ideas of the core motivation, the audience empathy mechanism, and the psychological reward for the viewer. So in the hero, what's the core motivation is pro-social self-sacrifice. So they're going to go in and give of themselves. It's an altruistic story that they're giving of themselves to humanity to help a cause, to advance a cause, to conquer the villain. Then we have the anti-hero, self-interest, flawed justice. So we can think of plenty of movies with that idea where we see somebody wanting to exact revenge on a system that, oh gosh, what was that? Man on Fire, I think,
Okay.
is one of those movies. And so many. I remember the one with Michael
Perfect.
Douglas.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can't remember the name of that movie, but you
Was
know,
it that Man on Fire?
no, I think it was. I think that was another. I thought Man on Fire was the one with the John Travolta. Where's the one where he takes John Travolta's in the bank, and the bank forecloses or does a finance? There's some financial issue in the bank.
That one I don't remember. I thought the Michael Douglas one was the one that's Man on Fire, where like everything just keeps happening to him, and then he like loses it.
Yeah,
Like,
and we
just
all can
goes on a
relate to that.
rampage.
Yeah, we all can relate to that, and we want to see it. It's the idea of this, yeah, getting justice in this flawed way that, and somehow he's able to escape, or sometimes even in that the person dies at the end because we can't let them get out of that. We know that there's something so wrong about that that sometimes the resolution is death, which gives an indirect idea of freedom from the problem
Yeah.
and an escape of consequences. And I think so many times people think, well, I do this if I could get away with it. And I think that's where we're going to go back to our idea of our own morality, our own ideas of truth, honor, and integrity in this. And then the next, so in the core motivation for the villain, it's unmitigated agency, selfish domination. I want to rule the world. I need all this power, and all of you will be my minions, you know? And so even when we think of Despicable Me, we think how we love Gru. He's cute, he's endearing, he's sweet, he's got a good soul, and yet he wants to, you know, at one point he wanted to be this super villain, and now he's, you know, conquering the other supervillains who all have their flawed stories. And so,
Yeah.
so the next piece in your audience empathy mechanism for the hero, it's moral approval. We like them because they are fundamentally good. For the anti-hero, we identify with them and we justify their actions. We excuse their flaws and enjoy their wins. And that's a deep, vicarious living through experience that we get to go through with that. And with the villain, there's a fascination and shared darkness. We are captivated by their unyielding power. So what I think we want to look at here is from emotional algebra is the idea of all the parts and pieces within us, and the ones that we feel are socially acceptable and the ones we continue to keep buried, that there is a vicarious expression. While we know that we couldn't do this and get away with it, how do we find those parts of us that feel like the villain and learn to love them within ourselves the same way that we love these villains and anti-heroes, you know? And I think that's finding a peace within ourselves without having to act it out in life, but finding the resolution of self-love, grace, forgiveness, and understanding for that. So the psychological reward for the viewer in the hero is inspiration and hope. We leave the movies, the Marvel movies, and we're like, yeah, we're gonna jump higher, run faster. Remember, as a kid, you see kids run out, they're jumping in the air and swinging their swords, and doing their Iron Man thing with the Spider-Man. Woo! So, and then the idea of anti-heroes, that catharsis and rebellion. Well, just a little fact about catharsis is they used to think that if people had this catharsis release of anger or rage or hatred, that it would lead to a decrease in aggression. It actually increases rates of aggression later because people feel that it's okay because they felt that release of cortisol. They felt that release of stress. So then they start to think, well, this is the way I get rid of my stress, is by doing this, you know? So that's one thing for viewers just to keep in mind. Catharsis isn't an outlet that's going to lead to peaceful feelings in the long run. For the villain, the psychological reward is the safe exploration of taboos. We get to look at all those things we're not supposed to do, and we get to wrap them up in 90 minutes and then often see, you know, the punishment of the villain as he pays the price.
Always
So
satisfying.
yeah. So I'm going to let you cover this one, Tara. You know, you have a really good grasp on this idea of from actors in real life to the characters on screen.
Yeah, I think we can kind of all relate to this. We're talking about through repeated media exposure, our brains form actual feelings of intimacy, kinship, and friendship with actors. And this is the authenticity piece that I've been talking about so much. The illusion of intimacy. We feel we know their values, personalities, and beliefs based solely on interviews and curated public personas. And this is always so interesting because if you see like a morning talk show host or a reporter or an anchor, there were many times that I went out into the public and it was like, oh my gosh, like it was so lovely because people felt like they knew me. And that's just such a cool thing, just because somehow I was able to connect with them on a level through a television screen. Conversely, I've heard people who are like A-list actors, they don't get people coming up to them as much because they almost feel like, oh my gosh, you know, that's like Hollywood elite. So it is interesting to see like how that illusion of intimacy has its own, you know, arc based on who you are. And then because our brains process these actors as real friends, they bypass our mental defenses, increasing our susceptibility to the ideas that they portray on screen. And this is where I'm talking about the whole Cinderella complex. So you have to be like really careful that what you're seeing on screen is fairy tale. It is make-believe. Although it can be relatable and all of those things, we can sometimes grow up thinking the Cinderella theory, where it's like, oh my gosh, you know, this man's going to come in, he's going to save me, and we're going to live happily ever after, because that's what they show on TV and film. And whether you realize it or not, you've been conditioned that way through books and movies and all of these other things. So I was telling you previously, like jokingly, I'm like, yeah, I made sure my girls were like, yeah, that's not real. Like, that's not real. But you really can kind of fall into some of these illusions of intimacy, this persuasion engine of like, this is how things really are, because Hollywood, Disney in particular, does a very good job of convincing you that this is real life, which is why we love to get lost in that. And we want to believe that. We want to feel that it's true. And of course, the more authentic and persuasive the characters are, the more you can believe that these are like real characters in life. And oftentimes, you know, you'll hear people laugh and they're like, no, I believe Ross and Rachel are real. Like, I want to believe that that's a real relationship that's actually happening. But, you know, of course, in movies and books and film and all of that, they are trying so hard to persuade you, and they do it in such a great way that sometimes you have to remind yourself, like, this is not real.
Well, and I think that's a great point, because there are people who psychologically who might be a bit on the delusional side. I think you might remember Jodie Foster. She was stalked. There are many actors and actresses who have been stalked by people who want to be like them. And there've been movies about that too, to tell those stories as well. Yeah. And we want to realize that, yes, these are people just like us. These are people who are flawed. And sometimes there are actors who are such good actors, they're not like those characters. And some of the narcissism and arrogance that can be fed by somebody who might be an excellent actor, that they can even sometimes believe their own story, can get them further and further away from who they really are. That's why I think also you have some, you know, higher levels. You hear a lot of stories about actors, actresses, musicians, and who end up with addiction issues.
Yeah.
because that high of all that adulation and getting all that acceptance and love from outside of us can then lead to that schism, that difference between our ideal self, our feel self, and our real self. And I always say the more disparity between our ideal and our feel, the more distress people are under. And a teaser for our next episode, Tara and I are going to talk about an organization she created to help and advocate for child actors. Because usually you see child actors, and we talked about Corey Haim, Corey Feldman. We touched on the Brat Pack. We touched on that group in a previous episode, and the challenges that they went through as a part of their early fame and exposure, and not having people who are advocating for them. And even some adults really need people who are helping them stay grounded through this whole their acting arc and their story arc of their life. I look at a personal man in a whole story of Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah.
You look at his teen life, the fall into his addiction and the rise up to Iron Man and beyond that.
Absolutely.
And he fell into his darkness and he worked his way out of it. And some people aren't so lucky, and not in the way of financial success that he's had in the box office, but yet you hear about his personal journey and personal success and growth and ways. And that's, to me, where we really want to look to. How we look at success isn't in our bank account. It's in all these other ways that we can look at to identify, the people. We're all human in this. So
Absolutely.
the hypocrisy glitch. This is that cognitive dissonance we feel with an actor and how we identify with those actors. So an actor, and this was where, Tara, you were talking about authenticity, right?
Mhm.
And whether or not we feel that an actor is taking on a role that is authentic. And you hear about a lot of actors, they get a script, they read a script, and are like, no, this isn't me, And
Yep.
or there will be somebody who says, they say it's not me. Then somebody says, no, this is how we're going to do it. This is what we're going to do with it. And this is what's going to keep it consistent with your brand, basically. So tell us a little bit more about this and how you've seen it in your own experiences.
Yeah, when you say that an actor plays a role completely opposite to their real life values, I always, when I'm coaching kids, if like the dingbat, right? You can't play somebody, you can't have lack of intelligence unless you have intelligence. So it's the whole arc, right? And it's why somebody like a Reese Witherspoon can play a ditz so well. That's a highly intelligent woman. So same thing. If you're super compassionate and you have that empathy, well, then you can play a narcissist quite well as well, because
Mhm.
it's the lack of that emotion. You have to understand that emotion to understand the lack of that emotion. So hopefully that makes sense. So when an actor is coming in and saying, I can't do that, if an actor truly doesn't have empathy, then that role is not right for them if they're trying to come up with a compassionate character. And sometimes when that happens, the audience is going to spot that hypocrisy. They're going to feel it. And the result is they're going to reject it. They're going to feel disconnected. The show is not going to do well. That character is going to get killed off. Something is going to happen. But conversely, when you have that strong bond there, it's like all of a sudden they feel it, they get it. The audience is like, I feel so connected with this. And they align with the actor. They maintain that psychological bond. And those are the actors that normally move on to be Academy Award winners, because people demand more of their performance because they want to feel that. They want to feel that connection, because at the end of the day, that's what humans want. They want connection. And if they're getting it on film, on TV, it's like, I want more of that. So they want to see that person more and more.
Yeah, and I took years ago when I was working on my media work and wanting to really get more involved in doing this work and on the news and creating our Off the Couch with Dr. E show. I took an acting class, and the acting class was one of the immersive classes where they rather than go through different things to teach us how to act, we're just going to give you this script, and I want you to play this character. And they gave me a character that I couldn't do. It was a character that was just despicable, and they were hiding this behind their persona they wanted to project to the world. I left the court. I stopped going to the thing because it felt so distasteful that I couldn't do it. It was so antithetical to my whole brand and the whole way I wanted to see life. And I felt, part of me felt cheated in that experience, because I asked if I could do something different. No, this is the role I want you to play. I want you to reach. I'm like, I can't reach. I want to throw up when I think about the actions of this character. And I still feel nauseous when I think about that, because part of it is I felt like I let down my co-actor who was playing opposite me in that. It was just for a class. And I felt I felt cheated by the experiences of that. And, so I think even in that whole emotional journey of just learning how to act, it is something you want to be able to immerse yourself into. And I think that's where, like we've talked, some actors can get lost in their characters they play. And also, again, they're good at what they do too. So the key to this slide to me is that parasocial bond, that social bond that's beyond a face-to-face connection, yet we connect with that connection through the screen. Because in this next slide, we're gonna go into that idea of again, how that parasocial bond is affected by the editing. It goes beyond the acting to what the editors are doing. And we had a great discussion from your perception of this again, Tara. I thought you had some really great insights in telling this story.
Yeah, it's kind of what I said at the beginning. If you watch a horror movie on mute, it's just not scary. And the heartbeat of the entire film comes down to the score, right? Like, I mean, watch Jaws with the volume down, and you're like, that's nothing. So
it's a fish swimming.
and what's really funny is, like, if you actually see Jaws like today versus the special effects we have now, our kids will probably laugh at it. But not only just that anticipation of the music, but also understanding like that breath, that pause. And in acting, we call it a beat, where it's like you have to just like pause, and understanding whether it's for a comedic beat, a comedic pause, whether it's for a very dramatic pause. But the power of silence, it can just be amazing. Deafening. Yeah, I mean, it really is just unreal what you can get from that. And then the anticipation, like generating emotion by not showing the action, is always so cool. And that's always so fun for actors to play around with, cutting away just before the impact forces the audience's imagination to do it, which really spikes the tension. Because sometimes I'll tell my girls when I'm coaching them, what you're not saying is more powerful than what you are saying. And the goal is to get the audience to feel what you're not saying, because our imaginations are always going to fill in so many more details than what the actor is giving on screen. So it's a phenomenal technique. But this is really the heartbeat of the entire film is right here. Once you get into the music, the score, the pauses, the breath, the silence, it takes you on its own emotional journey in and of itself. I mean, conversely, if you're like closing your eyes and squinting, the sounds that you hear in a horror flick, whether it be the music, some of the special effects sounds of cracking and crunching and gushing and, all that nastiness, you're still having that visceral reaction. So that tells you how important the sound is, even over the visual of it.
I don't think editors, directors, and sound technicians get the credit they deserve, because to me, they more make the actor often early on than does the actor make themselves in ways.
Agreed.
And that's where I think, we have them almost as the afterthoughts in the award shows, when those are the people who make it. Even when you look at the producers and editors who really make the directors look like stars as well. So there's that whole interaction of all these pieces make the movie, not just the actor, but who do we it idolizes the person we see on the screen, not all those people behind it,
It takes a village. I mean, if you've never been on a movie set, let me just tell you, there are hundreds of people, from administration all the way to lighting, sound, grips, catering. I mean, all of it's important. Every single person there is important to make it happen.
Well, just look at how long those credits roll. And how many people look at the credits roll? Not many people are out of there, So, I look at somebody like an Alfred Hitchcock, and never did you see what really he let your imagination. I think today's movies, they jump the shark on all this because almost people want to see it because our brains have been programmed to see it. And if we don't see it, it's like, no, you robbed me of this. I wanted to see that person get blown up and blown away and see parts fly everywhere versus it be imagination. And I think in that we've trained our brains to almost expect the gore and the blood, and we feel entitled to see that. Whereas I think what that does is it makes the things that happen in real life almost not seem as dramatic and or tragic as they should to us.
It's
You know,
being sensitized. I talk to my girls about it all the time, that being a reporter, unfortunately, I would see some unedited footage that, of course, would never make air of crime scenes, wars, whatever it was. And those are things that live with me that I'll never get out of my brain, no matter how hard I try and want to. But today, I think people seek it and they try and find it online. And I always have to, tell my girls, be very careful, about what you're feeding your soul visually and through, even music that you listen to, because it greatly affects you. You can't unsee or unhear something.
Yeah. Yeah. And I go back to in the news when there were the beheadings that they were showing. This is where to me, art imitated life after the fact. But we had the beheadings that were shown, and I was interviewed about that and whether or not the CNN, HLN should have showed it. I said, absolutely not.
No.
This is something where now we're desensitizing culture to it. And what happened a few years after that? Thanos was beheaded in a movie and they washed his head. Look at all the shows, movies now, things where you're seeing these graphic things that now when it happens in life, it's not as tragic, and that should always be tragic. All those actions should be seen as tragedies of a human condition to where we want to cause that pain to somebody. And yet we say it's vicarious, enjoyment. Well, then we want to look at our underlying emotions of rage and hatred and anger and vengeance and cruelty that we feel and learn to understand why they're there. Remember, they're always protective. They never come first and never come alone. And that's where if we don't understand our own emotional specificity, and maybe people feel like, well, you're taking the joy out of the movie, you're taking the joy out of life. No, you're giving understanding to things that we didn't understand. We're helping ourselves bring ourselves back to a deeper level of compassion and understanding and awareness. And if we take that emotional ride, great. And yet then after that emotional ride is over, we can say, okay, that was a movie and that helped me to do this and it helped me to understand this emotion. Here's the empathy engine. So first, the shape is, we look at creating the blueprint. The script provides the universal emotional trajectory, example, man in a hole, to back our baseline psychology. The next part, the actor becomes the vessel, that parasocial, and this is where coming back to that idea of parasocial, beyond the parasocial bonds and the anthropomorphism trick, our bodies, brains, and forming a human connection and granting empathy. So we're talking about not only the idea of the human character in the movie, we're talking about the lamp that comes to life and the Woody character and the Buzz character and all these things that now have human characteristics and take on those traits and of the individuals, and we can relate to them. And then we have the edit, which is the pulse of the movie, as we've talked about. Pace and anticipation manipulate our physiological heart rate and also breathing in real time. So it's affecting us physiological. And that's where we get on that ride, that emotional ride. And finally, the chemistry or the output is where oxytocin and cortisol are released, which transforms fictional pixels into real world fears, joy, and adrenaline. And that's really, to me, this key of understanding the art of film, the art of the movies, the different ones we might like and might not like, the exacerbation of our own neuroses and psychoses to some degree in these hour and a half to 2 hour to 3 hour segments of our life that we bring to life within ourselves. And here we come to the cheat sheet of the point. What do we want you to take away from this? So I'll let you bring this one to life, Tara.
Yeah, I think the ultimate brain hack, right? A good story is just a chemical cocktail. And I love that. Cortisol buys their attention, oxytocin buys their empathy. The lamp test, or that little Pixar lamp, we're biologically hardwired to project feelings onto anything that moves with purpose, even a desk lamp, even Wilson, which the volleyball in Castaway, the dark side pass. We secretly love villains because they have unmitigated agency. They do what we wish we could do safely behind a screen. And then the editor's trick, where the filmmakers don't just cut scenes, they cut to your heartbeat. A withheld shot builds more tension than an explosion. And I think another great example of somebody that puts this all together in sometimes like a 30 to 60 second commercial is Publix. They can pull on your heartstrings in like 2.5 seconds. If you've ever seen like their Mother's Day commercials or Christmas holiday commercials, they do such a beautiful job of completing this full circle and putting it in a bow and pulling on your heartstrings with all of the things. You know, they've got that chemical, they get the cortisol, they get your attention, they project the feelings, whether with a pie, and you know, then they forget the villain part. That doesn't really happen in a Publix commercial, but then they have the music and they tie it all up. And, you know, you can start to see all of these little examples as you go through life.
That the Publix commercial you're talking about is a man in a hole in 60 seconds. Why? Because the animals are seen as the villain. They get in the hole because the postman is afraid of them. Then all the animals realize, oh my gosh, we've caused this postman pain. We have to fix that. We have to climb out of this hole. So they make the pie for him to let him know that they love him. The reason they're treating him the way isn't because they want to cause him pain. The reason they're treating him that way is because they really love him and enjoy the game that they play, where to him it's not a game. So man in a hole.
Yeah, it's great. This was a great episode. You know, just movies are phenomenal. Art is phenomenal. Actors are phenomenal people that they get to tap into emotions the way that they do, and help us go on journeys and rides that we need. We need that in life. And I love American film. I love it.
So here's the behind the scenes, viewers, is we were going to do 2 minutes on each slide and really keep the pace up, like a movie needs to keep its pace. And we're an hour into this again, Tara.
Well, it's good. That's what happens with good conversation, you know?
Absolutely.
So like if an editor got a hold of it, it would be like, no, we said 2 minutes. So we'd like chop it up.
Yep. And that's where I get to be the editor. So my narcissism allows me to keep all of this in. And if you don't like it, too bad. I love it.
You're the villain.
So again, viewers, thanks for joining us on this journey. And Tara, thanks for joining me here. I love bringing in your expertise into all these episodes. You bring something special to everyone that we've done and everyone that we will do. So next time, like I said, we're gonna talk about an organization Tara created with her experience in acting with herself and her kids, that she wants to make a difference. And it goes beyond that too. It goes down. It really goes into how we advocate for our kids to find true success in life and to be grounded through their experiences, rather than have us get carried away by it and or have them get carried away by it. So until next time.